musical representations of Journey in Celeste. Indie platformer Celeste, released in 2018, achieved popularity due to its retro style and critically acclaimed depictions of mental health. The game demonstrated many of these narrative elements not only via its dialogue and visuals, but also via musical motives. Not surprising given that its composer, Lena Raine, identifies herself as someone who is always a fan of using convenient metaphors in music. How exactly are these musical metaphors achieved? Raine explains that she associates particular instrumentation with characters in the game, but her metaphors also involve melodic and textural elements. Tim Summers, in his 2016 Ludomusicology chapter, suggests that we should consider how these musical elements are heard to mean in the context of the game. What interpretations can readily be drawn from the deployment of the musical material? Given Raine's emphasis on musical metaphor, one possible avenue for analysis might be recent work in topic theory. Sean Atkinson, for instance, considers previous scholarship by David Neumeyer and Byron Almen on film music, and recontextualizes this for video game, stating that occurrences of tropes in music, especially instances such as video game cues, have an independent power to convey narrative. Furthermore, Atkinson outlines that such usage is not limited to topics acting as musical signifiers, but rather these tropes can take on an additional narrative role of foreshadowing future events and thus influencing player actions. One such topic described by Atkinson is the soaring topic, associated with musical features including ascending perfect fifth or larger leaps, repeated upwards arpeggiations or flourishes, and rising stepwise motion. Celeste's introduction begins with a strikingly obvious soaring topic, the pitches E, B, F sharp, E, which includes two rising perfect fifths followed by a stepwise descent to the tonic note, an obvious metaphor for the mountain climbing that's the main focus of the game's narrative. However, in combination with other diegetic sounds that begin the game, the motive also suggests an initiation of the journey, onwards and upwards. The high register of the subsequent music further establishes this trope's evocation of ascent and geographical elevation in the game. Other cues in the music feature a similar evocation of ascent. Of particular note is the use of ostinato in the game. Let's listen to a few examples. All four of these examples employ ascending motion and repeated upwards arpeggiations or flourishes, characteristic of the soaring topic. The ostinati also repeat continuous 8th or 16th notes, providing a constant pulse within the game's musical texture. This repetition parallels the game mechanics. Much like Super Meat Boy, Celeste is a hard retro platformer. Players repeat the same section of a level multiple times in short increments, a process suspiciously similar to the short repeated ostinato structure within the music. Such a parallelism is not without precedent. Royale 2016, for instance, maps out a similar correspondence in Portal 2, where the music's theme and variations developmental processes mirrors the game's iterative puzzle structure. The music of Celeste also incorporates repetition at other structural levels, helping to articulate narrative. For example, Lena Raine speaks explicitly of her compositional process for the song Resurrections, the main level music of Chapter 2, in a 2018 interview with Ryan Paquette for the online magazine Original Sound Version. She states that in Resurrections, she ended up combining 4 to 5 cues from the game that all take place in Chapter 2 into this track that tells a complete narrative arc in a way that tries to emulate the arc of the game itself. The song combines motives via layering and looping processes at several hierarchical levels of structure. Compared to the version on the game's official soundtrack, Resurrection's in-game implementation splits the song in two at the moment of encounter with the main character's alternate self, which I'll discuss shortly. This portion of the analysis will focus on the first half of the song. 4 distinct musical modules create the overall texture. Module A consists of an ascending arpeggiating chord motive in 8th notes, initially played by a soft synth that stacks to form the song's underlying ostinato. Module B is a mostly stepwise piano melody that emphasizes the key of A minor through long tones on A, C, and E, followed by the leading tone G sharp. Module C presents the step motion pattern G, A, B, C, or G sharp, A, B, C, in syncopated half notes. It also includes an E drone in its inner voice and a descending step motion line in its lowest voice. And finally, Module D is the second mostly stepwise piano melody with strong similarities to Module B, but this time with long tones emphasizing E and B. An interesting developmental process occurs in Module A. Beginning with the ascending arpeggiated chord motive, which I will term ARPG, the song repeats 8 iterations of the motive, each separated by half-note increments, a combination that I will term ARPG stack. Upon completion of this 8-fold repetition, the process begins again on a new chord, with the complete Module A cycling through an A minor chord with added major 7th, a C major chord, an F major 7 chord, and an E major chord. This complete module forms the ostinato of Resurrections, continuing as an independent textural layer in conjunction with the modules B, C, and D identified earlier. The structure is mapped out on screen. Note the gradual increase in density. The work begins with one textural layer, adds a second layer upon the introduction of thematic module B, continues with a different combination of 2 textural layers with modules A and C, and finally retains modules A and C while adding the new melodic module D. The number of repetitions vary, however, in the gameplay implementation compared to the official soundtrack. Inspired by Summer's methodology, I compared multiple play sessions to narrow down the music's game triggers. In one walkthrough, module C repeated 3 times before the entry of D. The cue triggering the entry of module D appeared to be the player entering a room containing a mirror. And upon reaching the mirror, Resurrections halted momentarily. After a brief Shattered Mirror musical cue, the Resurrections music resumed, but now with a shift to include digital timbres and an added drum track. As summarized in the diagram, the AB and AC combos were thus paired to form the pre-Shattered Mirror loop, while the AC and ACD combos were paired to form the post-Shattered Mirror loop. As Medina Gray 2019 describes, this process involves the computer stringing them together and layering them on top of each other, into a soundtrack that accompanies a player's individualized experience with the game. Modularity, in short, allows game music to be dynamic, to change along with the game's similarly flexible visuals and events. Medina Gray introduces vocabulary to identify the relative smoothness of these junction points. The Shattered Mirror cue in Celeste creates what she would term a sequential seam, with the music stopping completely before the next module begins, whereas the in-loop shift from one module to another creates a simultaneous or overlapping seam, as does the move from the intro ostinato module A to the first melodic module B. This is significant because the starkly contrasting rupture of the sequential seam, matching the dramatic shift of timbre, signals the literal rupture of the mirror and the splitting of the protagonist's personality into 2 opposing forces. Madeline is now aware of her alternate self and realizes that entity, Badeline, can affect her world. Initially positioned as the evil version of the main character, Badeline is later revealed to be a much more complex manifestation of Madeline's psyche. Returning to Atkinson's analysis one last time, his article focuses on how musical tropings can also actively participate in the game's narrative, to subvert and disrupt the audience's expectations. For instance, in his analysis of 2 cues from The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword and Final Fantasy IV, he identifies a combination of rising step motion with downwards arpeggiation that foreshadows the literal descent of flight later in the game. In Celeste, when the 2 characters first encounter one another, a new theme titled Little Goth enters. The song has 3 textural layers: a high register synth melody, a repeating ascending step piano ostinato repeating the notes A, B, C, and a chromatically descending piano bass line. The interlocking of descending step motion bass with a rising step motion ostinato foreshadows the duality of Madeline versus Badeline, 2 characters who in the climax of the game learn that they fit together and need each other despite their ongoing opposition. As Rain explains, the song combines the 2 thematic associations of Madeline, piano, and Badeline, minor mode. Upon their reconciliation later in the game, the instrumentation of Little Goth shifts entirely to piano, depicting their unification into a single self. Repetition is key to the format of Celeste, both in its game mechanics and its narrative. Tropes are a useful narrative device to link musical features to gameplay features, which Rain, working from a compositional perspective of musical metaphor, achieves via motivic layering, looping, and ostinato. The result is a reinforcement of the reiterative aspects of the game, effectively creating a soundtrack that supports storytelling.